This is the training for God's mission from Genesis to Revelation. This is a training we typically do in our intensives. We do it on the first day. And I'm just going to walk through basically how I do this training module. Just one couple notes. This training module is what we say high in principle, not a lot of practical things to like come away with. And the reason for that is in the intensive trainings, we tend to try to hammer on principles because long term, what keeps people in the game and keeps them engaged in God's mission, not always the tools, but it's the principles behind those tools which are exemplified in Scripture. So with that said, let me jump over to the module. One other thing, there is a expanded version of the Genesis to Revelation God's mission. It's just this is a much tighter with a few less scriptures, and I think you'll get the point. So let me move over to my document camp and I'll walk through what I do with Genesis to Revelation. All right, so here we go. I apologize for the blurriness of this. So the way this module or discovery breaks down is basically done in two parts. This first part right up here, the Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 11, we're going to do as a large group. So if I'm doing an intensive and there's 20, 30 people there, we're all doing this together. This section down here is done at the tables on a localized level where we actually form the tables in the churches. So this is done at each of the individual tables. The top part is done by the facilitator of this module. So it's real simple. The first thing we do is, and all this is discovery. So the first thing we do is, also one other thing, this is always good to have handed out to the people who are participating in the training. We found that if they are trying to write down these verses because it's on the board, they spend their whole time writing the verses down and not really getting kind of scrambling, not focusing on what it says. So we hand this out to everybody. And all this right here, what you see, this section right here is written up on a whiteboard. So obviously somebody's going to have to take the time to do that ahead of time. But that's how we found it works best. This is up on the board and this every person has this handed out in their hand. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, this is what we do. The first thing we do is you're going to come up in front of the group and everyone's going to have this and say, hey, everyone, please open your Bibles. And we're just going to walk through these first few verses up here, if you can see them. Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28. And just for the sake of time for this video, I'm not going to read through each of them. I would have somebody read this, read it out loud to read that module or that, I'm sorry, that passage out loud. And then they read it and you ask the question, what do you see? Just general observation. Ask them what they see, right? And you're going to hear all kinds of stuff because there's a lot going on there. But what we're looking for in that first verse is basically the image of God is mentioned, or the word image is mentioned 3 times. And we also hear be fruitful, or the word multiply, depending on your translation. Also, fill the earth is found there. And we also get the concept of ruling or reigning or subduing the creation, which is huge because that is where we really land the story, is ruling this creation with God. But what we want to look for is image bearers and they're being fruitful. All right. Well, cool. And then I have Genesis 3 bracketed like that. And the only reason is we're not going to read it. We're just going to ask the group, hey, what happens in Genesis 3? Because there's a lot going on there, just 2 chapters later. And you're going to hear a lot of stuff. But basically, what you're looking for is that sin entered the world. It fractures our relationship with God. But most importantly, for our purposes here, the image of God is marred. It's severely altered in Genesis chapter 3. And we really see this come to fruition in Genesis 6, 1 through 5. And so, not 1 through 5, 1 and 5, I'm sorry. And so ask somebody to read that. And again, on 3, we're just summarizing what's going on there. We're not reading it. It's just way too long. We'd be here all night. So read it, and what you're going to see in chapter 6, verses 1 and 5 is that the image bearers have multiplied, but unfortunately, what they're multiplying is widespread evil and just a lot of bad stuff. So we see the image bearers are multiplying, but what they're multiplying is a distorted image of God. And so, as we know, what happens next is God wipes out the planet, all the image bearers except for Noah's family. All right. So we fast forward to after the flood, chapter 9. And this is literally 100, almost 120 years later, verse 9:1. And we see him telling Noah that we have them read it, and we hear that word again, multiply across the planet and fill the planet. So we see the same theme. Image bearers are supposed to fill and multiply and cover the planet. Then we jump another 1,000 years. I mean, we're jumping lots of time here. Chapter 11, verse 4. I'm sorry, this is supposed to be 1 through 4. My bad. We read it and we ask observations. Again, observation in all this. Get them talking as a group. Observation. And what we see is the famous story of the Tower of Babel. Lots of misunderstandings about that, but what we're going to see is they try to build a temple all the way to the top. I'm sorry, all the way to God, try to make a name for themselves. But we're going to see in verse 4, they were unwilling to scatter, which is violating God's his plan all along, is that his image bearers would basically go across the planet. So basically, what we're seeing here is that from the beginning, right from the beginning, we want to establish that God's plan, his intention, was always to multiply his image bearers, right? Across the face of the planet. And whenever this got frustrated or was being stalled on a massive level, God steps in and begins to correct this. And so, what we want to do is we want to transition down into these other passages after Genesis 11. And we want to see that God's plan and mission really has never changed from the beginning. In fact, he's expanded it now. So at each of our groups, or each of our table groups, I want you to read the passage, and we want to answer the question, how far did God's plan extend again? And who did he choose to use it? Okay. So just by way of example, I'll do the first one, Genesis 12, 1. I'll read that real quick, and I think it'll be very apparent that God's plan has not changed at all and is getting much more localized in who he uses. So Genesis 1, chapter 12, verses 1 through 12, or 1 through 3. That's what you get when you get a dyslexic guy. The Lord said to Abram, go out from your land, go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt. And all the peoples, or all families on the earth, will be blessed through you. So really very crystal clear here. So how far? All peoples or families of the earth. Right. And who's he going to use? Abram. Right. So what we're going to do here is, at your tables, you're going to just childlike observations. Don't get too deep into these passages. Childlike observations. And what we found is that when we discover truth in community, it tends to stick a little bit more. And so take your time, read each passage. And so what was the extent of his vision, and who did he use? Oh, one caveat, just real quickly. Sometimes who he used is not always really clear from the passage, but from the context of the passage, we can pick up basically who God is using in that passage. All right. So give them about 10 minutes to do this, and then just step back and then come back about 10 minutes later. All right. Break, 10 minutes. You jump back in, and we're just going to dive into each of these passages. and we're going to find out who God uses. Exodus 19, 5 through 6. We find out it's the whole earth. And it's the nation of Israel. I just put Israel would be either or, right? Psalm 67, all nations. Oh, one other thing, you're going to notice you can read these passages underneath here, Habakkuk, Acts. We're actually going to refer to that one, 1 Peter 2:9, 2 Peter 3. These passages just reinforce what is happening inside each of these verses. So it's not necessary to read all of them, although we will read this one because it has some bearing on that, significant bearing on Acts 1:8. So all nations, and we can also surmise or conclude that it's Israel because of where it was written and who it was written to. Isaiah 49:5, all nations. And again, this is not quite as clear, but from the context, um, it's Jesus, his messenger. Just one note on 49 verses 5 and 6. One of the things I love about this is he uses a phrase in verse 5, it's too light a thing, just a phrase we don't hear every day, that this plan, this message could be contained within one nation, that it has to expand just by the nature of our God and the power of this message and who he is. And then we see a significant shift down here. We see the same thing, all nations, but now we see the who is expanded. There's a shift. It's now disciples, people who are following Jesus Christ. A major shift. Kingdom agents now are disciples. Acts 1:8, we get a little bit of it gets a little bit expanded, it gets a little more detailed, but he says how far is Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And who is he going to use? His witnesses. Most specifically, his spirit empowered witnesses. Just a couple notes right here. A couple things I do want to pause right here and make a note that we see a pattern here in terms of he wants it to start local and then get to the ends of the earth. And so we often see in mission in churches and people, but we really focus on the ends of the earth sometimes at the expense of our local. And it's supposed to start local and move its way out to the ends of earth. This is where we're supposed to be obedient with it initially. Now, what's really cool, we have a little cool little thing, is when you're disobedient to Acts 1:8 to start local, to go a global, we get Acts 1 8:1, which is where God instituted persecution um, to scatter the believers. And what I love about this passage is they scatter. It's a nameless, faceless group of men and women who scatter and tell the story of Christ wherever they go, which is really cool because this group probably ultimately started the church in Antioch, that scatters. So we don't do Acts 1:8. God brings Acts 8:1, which is persecution to scatter the saints. So we move to 2 Corinthians 5:18 through 20. We hear again, it's the whole earth. And then we get this neat term, we're ambassadors, which is a absolutely rich term. Ambassadors are entrusted with a message to represent a king. And then we get to Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 to 10, and we get all tribes and all peoples, every nation, which is just rich. Now, we're not quite sure on the who, but based upon what we've seen here, it's his followers that God uses to bring about this. Just a real cool little note here. I've always wanted my kids, I always tell them, man, where am I in the Bible? I'm like, you're right here. When John saw this massive group of people, I was in there. I was seen in Revelation chapter 7. I'm in that group. That's really cool. So you're in this big crowd. So if you ever wonder where you are in the Bible, you're right there. Now, just on the flip side of it, you want to know where all your lost friends are in the Bible? They're in Revelation 20, standing before the great white throne, getting ready to be judged for what they've done. And so everybody is found in the Bible at one place or another. All right. So at that point, what we want to do is we want to put it back to the groups, and we want to ask them to come away with some simple takeaway main point ideas and just give them maybe 3 to 5 minutes for this. Make it tight, and then come back and report. All right. So give them 5 minutes, and we come back and we listen to what they said. And what you want to hear, you hope, is that from cover to cover, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, we see that God's heart and mission to multiply his image bearers across the planet for his glory hasn't changed. It was the plan from the get-go. And who he uses is his disciples, his people, with the gospel. And so my big takeaway is the whole of life is rigged for this, because this is our Father's heart. So this is worth being a part of. This is worth living for. And I would also say it's worth dying for. So it begs the question, what is it going to take? What has to alter in my life to get a part of this plan? Because this is what our Father's a part of. This is the God's mission from Genesis to Revelation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call me or email me.